Our strategy was always consumer first. There were a few reasons for that. One, the models were not robust and skilled enough for most enterprise uses, and now they're getting there. The second was we had this clear opportunity to win in consumer, and those are rare and hard to come by. If you win in consumer, it makes it massively easier to win in enterprise, and we are seeing that now. But as I mentioned earlier, this was a year where enterprise growth outpaced consumer growth, and given where the models are today, where they will get to next year, we think this is the time where we can build a really significant enterprise business quite rapidly. I mean, I think we already have one, but it can more.
For a long time, OpenAI was seen as an experimental lab, a place where new models appeared, demos went viral, and each release felt like another step in an ongoing research journey. But according to Sam Altman himself, that phase is ending. OpenAI is no longer primarily experimenting. It's entering a new phase, one focused on scale, enterprise adoption, and restructuring how intelligence is actually used in the real world. Sam Altman recently sat down with Alex Kantrowitz on the Big Technology podcast, and what stood out wasn't a single product announcement or model upgrade. Instead, it was a clear shift in mindset. Altman wasn't talking about the next flashy release. He was talking about how OpenAI's growth engine has fundamentally changed, how companies are now integrating AI into core workflows, and why the biggest transformation hasn't even been felt yet. The first major shift Altman points to is where OpenAI's growth is now coming from. For years, OpenAI was widely viewed as a consumer-first company, largely because of ChatGPT. That strategy was intentional. Early models weren't robust enough for enterprise-scale deployment, and consumer adoption provided both data and momentum. But Altman explains that this year marked a turning point. Enterprise growth has now overtaken consumer growth. That matters more than it sounds. Enterprise adoption isn't about people casually asking questions. It's about companies restructuring how work gets done. Coding, customer support, finance, science, entire verticals are now building around AI rather than simply experimenting with it. Altman makes it clear that many enterprises no longer want isolated AI tools. They want platforms. They want AI woven into every layer of decision-making and execution. This shift raises an unavoidable question: what happens to jobs? The interviewer brings up a real-world example that feels increasingly common. A worker transitions from doing the work to managing AI systems that perform the work. Eventually, even that management role disappears. Altman doesn't dismiss this concern, but he doesn't lean into panic either. He openly acknowledges that the short-term transition will be rough. Some roles will disappear. Some transitions will be painful. But he strongly rejects the idea that humans will become irrelevant. Altman argues that humans are deeply wired to seek meaning, contribution, and creative expression. That drive doesn't vanish just because technology advances. Instead, the nature of work evolves. What we call jobs today may look completely different by 2050. The work won't disappear, but the form it takes will change. What's striking is how far Altman is willing to push this idea. He openly entertains the concept of an AI CEO, not as a dystopian takeover, but as a governed system operating under human oversight. In one analogy, he imagines a future where humanity collectively acts as a board of directors, setting constraints and goals, while AI executes decisions at a scale no human could manage alone.
Companies seem ready for it. The technology seems ready for it. Coding is so far, but there are others that are now growing, other verticals that are now growing very quickly. And we're starting to hear enterprises say, I really just want an app platform.
Which vertical?
Company. Finance. Science is the one I'm most excited about of everything happening right now, personally. Customer support is doing great.
I know you're not an economist, so I'm not going to ask you, like, what is the macro impact on jobs? But let me just read you one line that I heard, in terms of how this impacts from Blood in the Machine on Substack. This is from a technical copywriter. They said, chatbots came in and made it so my job was managing the bot of a team of reps. Okay, that to me seems like it's going to happen often. But then this person continued and said, once the bots were sufficiently trained up to offer good enough, then I was out. Is that going to become more common? Is that what bad companies are going to do? Because if you have a human who sort of orchestrate a bunch of different bots, then you might want to keep them. I don't know. How do you think about this?
So I agree with you that it's clear to see how everyone's managing like a lot of AIs doing different stuff. Eventually, like any good manager, hopefully your team better, but you just take on more scope and more responsibility. I am not a jobs doomer. Short term, I have some worry. I think that is likely to be rough in some cases, but we so deeply wired to care about other people, what other people do. We seem to be so focused on relatives and always wanting more and to be of use and service, to express creative spirit, whatever has driven us this long. I don't think that's going away. Now, I do think the jobs of the future, or I don't even know if jobs is the right word, whatever we're all going to do all day in 2050, probably looks better than it does today. But I don't have any of this like, oh, life is going to be without meaning and the economy is going to totally break. Like, we will find, I hope, much more meaning, and the economy, I think, will significantly change. But I think you just don't bet against evolution. I think a lot about how we can automate all the functions at OpenAI, and then even more than that, I think about like what it means to have an AI. It doesn't bother me. I'm like thrilled for it. I won't fight it. Like I don't want to be the person hanging on, being like, I can do this better. The handmaid
just make a bunch of decisions to sort of like direct all of our resources to giving AI more energy and power. It's like,
no, you would really
you put a guard on.
Yeah, like obviously you don't want an AI CEO that is not governed by humans. But if you think about maybe like this is a crazy analogy, but I'll give it anyway. Think about a version where like every person in the world was effectively on the board of directors of an AI company and got to tell the AI CEO what to do and fire them if they weren't doing a good job at that, and got governance on the decisions, but the AI CEO got to try to like execute wishes of the board. I think to people of the future that might seem like quite a reasonable thing.
The whole world is wondering how your revenue will line up with the spend. The question's been asked if the trajectory is $20 billion in revenue this year, and the spend commitment is $1.4 trillion. So I think it would be great just to over, and that's why I wanted to bring it up to you. I think it would be great to just lay it out for everyone once and for all how those numbers are going to work.
It's very hard to like really. I find that one thing, I certainly can't do it, and very few people I've ever met can do it. You can like intuition for a lot of mathematical things in your head, but exponential growth is usually very hard for people to do a good, quick mental framework on. Like, for whatever reason, there were a lot of things that evolution needed us to be able to do well with math in our heads. Modeling exponential growth doesn't seem to be one of them. So the thing we believe is that we can stay on a very steep growth curve of revenue for quite a while. And everything we see right now continues to indicate that. We cannot do it if we don't have the compute. Again, we're so compute constrained, and it hits the revenue line so hard that I think if we get to a point where we have like a lot of compute sitting around that we can't monetize on a profitable per unit of compute basis, it'd be very reasonable to say, okay, this is like a little, how's this all going to work? But we've penciled a bunch of ways. We will of course also get more efficient on like a flops per dollar basis as all of the work we've been doing cheaper comes to pass. But we see this consumer growth, we see this enterprise growth. There's a whole bunch of new kinds that we haven't even launched yet, but will. But compute is really the lifeblood that enables all of this. So we It's like checkpoints along the way, and if we're a little bit wrong about our timing or math, we have some flexibility. But we have in a compute deficit. It is always constrained what we're able to do. I unfortunately think that will always be the case, but I wish it were less the case, and I'd like to get it to be less over time, because I think there's so many great products and services that we can deliver, and it'll be a great business.
Okay, so it's effectively training costs go down.
They go up massively overall, but yeah.
And then your expectation is through things like this enterprise push, through things like people being willing for ChatGPT, through the API, OpenAI will be able to grow revenue enough to pay for it with revenue.
Yeah, that is the plan.
That idea sounds radical, but it aligns with how Altman sees the trajectory of intelligence. He isn't afraid of automation at the highest levels. He's more concerned with governance, guardrails, and alignment than with preserving traditional hierarchies. All of this ties into OpenAI's massive bet on compute. The company is spending staggering amounts on infrastructure, and critics regularly question whether the revenue can ever justify the scale. Altman's response is simple but bold. Demand for intelligence keeps growing, and it's growing exponentially. The real constraint isn't lack of customers, it's lack of compute. Altman explains that OpenAI has always been compute constrained. More compute immediately translates into more capability, more products, and more revenue. While the numbers can sound alarming, he emphasizes that exponential growth is notoriously difficult for humans to intuitively grasp. From OpenAI's perspective, investing heavily now is the only way to avoid becoming the bottleneck later. But even more interesting is what Altman says about progress slowing down. Many people fear a future where infrastructure is overbuilt and model improvements plateau. Altman doesn't see that as the real risk. Instead, he argues that we haven't even come close to extracting the value from the models we already have. This is where his concept of capability overhang becomes central. According to Altman, current models are far more capable than how they're being used. Most people are still interacting with them the same way they did years ago, asking basic questions, using shallow prompts, and failing to reorganize systems around what AI can actually do. The bottleneck isn't intelligence, it's deployment. Altman admits that he underestimated how long it would take the world to adapt. He assumed that once powerful models existed, society would rapidly reorganize around them. Instead, inertia dominates. Organizations move slowly. Structures resist change, and that creates a massive gap between what AI can do and what it's actually being used for. This gap has strange consequences. Even if model progress were to freeze tomorrow, Altman believes enormous economic value could still be unlocked simply by better deployment. That belief fundamentally reshapes how OpenAI thinks about growth, infrastructure, and timelines. Toward the end of the conversation, the discussion turns to AGI. And this is where Altman makes one of his most revealing statements. Rather than celebrating or denying the label, he questions whether AGI was ever defined properly in the first place. Modern models already outperform humans in many cognitive tasks. They contribute to scientific discovery, improve productivity, and demonstrate intelligence that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago. Yet something is still missing. Altman points to continuous learning, the ability to recognize a limitation, go out into the world, learn independently, and return improved. That, he argues, is a key ingredient that current systems lack.
I think the fear is that if things don't continue at pace, like here's one scenario, and you'll probably disagree with this, but like the model saturates, then the infrastructure becomes worth less than the anticipated value was. And then, yes, those data centers will be to someone, but it could be that they get liquidated and someone buys them at a discount.
Yeah, and I do suspect, by the way, there will be some like booms and busts along the way. These things are never a smooth line. First of all, it seems very clear to me, and this is like a thing I happily would bet the company on, that the models are going to get much, much better. We have like a pretty good window into this. We're very confident about that. Even if they did not, I think there's like a lot of inertia in the world. It takes a while to figure out how to adapt to things. The overhang of the economic value that I believe 0.2 represents relative to what the world has figured out how to get out of it so far is so huge that even if you froze the model at 5.2, how much more like you can you create and thus revenue can you drive? I bet a huge amount. In fact, you didn't ask this, but if I can go on a rant for a second. We used to talk a lot about this 2x2 matrix of short timelines, long timelines, slow takeoff, fast takeoff, and where we felt times the kind of probability was shifting and that was going to be, you could kind of understand a lot of the decisions and strategy that the world should optimize based off of where you were going to be on that 2x2 matrix. There's like a z-axis in my picture of this that's emerged, which is small overhang, big overhang. And I kind of thought that, I guess I didn't think about that hard, but like my retro on this is I must have assumed that the overhang was not going to be that massive, that the models had a lot of value in them. The world was pretty quickly going to figure out how to deploy that. But it looks to me now like the overhang is going to be massive in most of the work areas, like, you know, some subset of coders that'll get massively more productive by adopting these tools. But on the whole, this crazy smart model that, to be perfectly honest, most people are still asking this similar questions they did in the GPT-4 realm. Scientists, different, maybe knowledge work is going to get different, but there's a huge overhang. And that has a bunch of very strange consequences for the world. We have not wrapped our head around all the ways that's going to play out yet, but is very much not what I would have expected a few years ago.
You told him, this was right before GPT-5 came out, that GPT-5 is smarter than us in almost every way. I thought was the definition of AGI. Isn't that AGI? And if not, has the term become somewhat meaningless?
These models are clearly smart on a sort of raw horsepower basis. You know, there's all this stuff out in the last couple of days about GPT 5.2 has an IQ of 147 or 144 or 151 or whatever it is. It's like, you know, depending on whose test, it's like, it's some high number. And you have like a lot of their field saying it can do these amazing things and it's like contributing, it's making it more effective. You have the GDP val things we talked about. What you don't have is the ability for the model to not be able to do something today, realize it can't, go off and figure out how to learn to get good at that thing, learn to understand it, and when you come back the next day, it gets it right. And that kind of continuous learning, toddlers can do it. It does seem to me like an important part of what we need to do. Can you have something that most people would consider an AGI without that? I would say clear. I mean, there's a lot of people that would say we're at AGI with our current models. I think almost everyone would agree that if we were at the current level of intelligence and had that other thing, it would clearly be very AGI-like. But maybe most of the world will say, okay, fine, even without that, like it's doing most knowledge tasks that matter, it's smarter than us and most of us in most ways, we're at AGI. You know, it's discovering small pieces of new science, we're at AGI. What I think this means is that although it's been very hard for all of us to stop using, is very underdefined. I have a candidate. One thing I would love. We got it wrong with AGI. We never defined that. You know, the new term everyone's focused about is when we get to superintelligence. So my proposal is that we agree that, you know, AGI kind of went whooshing by. It didn't change the world that much. Will in the long term, but okay, fine. We've built AGIs. At some point, you know, we're in this like fuzzy period where some people think we have, and some people think we have, and more have, and then we'll say, okay, what's next? A candidate definition for superintelligence is when a system does a better job being president of the United States, CEO of a major company, you know, running a very large scientific lab, than a person can, even with the assistance of AI. I think this was an interesting thing about what happened with chess, where it could be humans. I remember this very vividly, the Deep Blue thing. And then there was a period of time where a human and the AI together were better than an AI by itself. And then the person was just making it worse, and the smartest thing, unaided AI that didn't have the human, like, not understanding its great intelligence. Something like that is like an interesting framework for superintelligence. I think it's like a long way off, but I would love to have like a cleaner definition this time around.
Because AGI was never clearly defined, Altman suggests it may have quietly whooshed by. Some people believe we already have it. Others disagree. And over time, more people will likely conclude that we crossed the threshold without a dramatic moment. Instead of obsessing over AGI, Altman shifts focus to what comes next: superintelligence. His proposed definition is strikingly concrete. Superintelligence isn't just about being smart. It's about outperforming the best humans, even when those humans are assisted by AI, in roles like running governments, managing major corporations, or leading scientific institutions. That benchmark reframes everything. It moves the conversation away from benchmarks and IQ scores and toward real-world impact and responsibility. When you connect all the dots, a clear picture emerges. OpenAI isn't just building better models, it's transitioning into a phase defined by enterprise scale, deep integration, massive infrastructure investment, and a long-term rethinking of work, governance, and intelligence itself. This is why Altman says OpenAI is done experimenting. Not because experimentation stops, but because the stakes have changed. The focus is no longer proving that AI works. It's about deploying it everywhere, responsibly, at scale, and faster than the world can currently adapt. And that's what makes this moment feel different. The models are already here. The capability is already here. The real transformation now depends on whether society can catch up. So the question isn't whether AGI has arrived. The question is whether we're ready for what comes after.